Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Day 5 of History Week, the history part of my 2020 library tour. Today we wrap up history, so let's get started. First, SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. This book is a history of Rome up to the early 200s AD when a Roman emperor extended the franchise or Roman citizenship to most residents of the empire. But the main focus of the book is the life of Cicero in the early mid 1st century BC, and then Beard works her way back and works her way forward. Although both parts are not as well realized as kind of as in-depth as the life of Cicero in that period. But I mean, it is a really good book. Regardless, I quite enjoyed it. Dynasty, The Rise and Fall of the House of Caesar by Tom Holland. This is a history of the Julian-Claudian dynasty, and I look forward to getting to it. This book was recommended by Triumphal Reads in a not quite recent video, Life in a Medieval City by Joseph and Francis Guilles. Quite looking forward to get to it. Hopefully it won't take me too long before I do. Revolution in the Air, 60s Radicals Turn to Lenin, Mao, and Che by Max Elbaum. Quite looking forward to getting to this. This one's great. Insurgency Empire, Anti-Colonial Resistance, and British Dissent by Priyamvada Gopal. This is a history of anti-colonial critique and resistance from British, Premier Britons in Britain in support of anti-colonial resistance in the colonies. And this book is fantastic. I loved every minute of this book. Highly, highly recommend it. Next is a biography of Richard III by Charles Ross. I want to say this is one of the there was a series on the Kings of England series that I'm thinking, I know Yale did one, and I also assume the University of California Press has done one too. So anyway, looking forward to getting to it. Next is How to Hide an Empire, A History of, of the Greater United States by Daniel Immerwahr. This book came out early last year, and it is fantastic. It's basically a history of American colonialism from Hawaii and Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and it is just an amazing, amazing history. Highly, highly recommended. I look forward to revisiting it. Next is a book that I also love, Arabs, A 3,000-Year History of Peoples, Tribes, and Empires by Tim McIntosh Smith. This is a history of the Arabs from the earliest to the present. And it's, I think, noted by Tim McIntosh Smith's sort of the humor he injects into it. And also the focus he pays to Yemen, where he lives. Which I think usually does not get a whole lot of attention paid to it. It's a really good book. Another history of the Arabs is A History of the Arab Peoples by Albert Arani. This book came out probably about 30 years ago originally, and then was reissued shortly after the September 11th attacks. Because there's a bit of a coda written by another by Melise Ruthven that deals with the post 9/11 attacks. But this book is really, really good as well. This is more of an intellectual history than a political history, but again, quite good. Although, with the coming of the Ottoman Empire, there's not a whole lot until the beginnings of anti-Ottoman resistance in the early 19th century. Next is The Medieval Foundations of England by G.O. Sales. I'm not totally sure where I picked this up from. Might have been a Friends of the Library book sale. Next is Feudal Society, Volume 1, The Growth of Ties of Dependence by Mark Bloch. Ronald Hutton's The Witch. This is a history of the witch figure, primarily in Britain, or not in Britain, throughout Europe, really, but also extends into globally as well, particularly with a bit of an interdisciplinary approach. But this is a really, really good history of the witch. I had some issues with it the first time I read it, though, because I read it last year twice. The first time I bailed, and because it's very, very academic. So if you're not prepared for that going in, it might put you to sleep. But when I came back to it prepared for the academic style, oh boy, the book was fantastic. It was one of the highlights of last year's Nonfiction November. The Fall of Imperial China by Frederick Wakeman Jr. Really need to read this book. I think I picked this up from a Friends of the Library book sale ages ago. A more recent acquisition is Ecstatic Nation, Confidence, Crisis, and Compromise, 1848 to 1877 by Brenda Wineapple. I picked this up a few months ago from Powell's. They had a sale on, I think. I'm a sucker for Powell's sales, honestly. Ooh, this one is good. And also going to be featuring on today's weekly reads. Inglorious Empire, What the British Did to India by Shashi Tharoor. This is a history of the British occupation and colonization of India. And it is amazing, and I will talk about it in greater depth later on tonight, or later this afternoon when I do weekly reads, because I read it this week. The Opium War by Julia Lovell. I picked this up in part because I do have a yearning for more Chinese history. I also picked up, I picked this up shortly after I picked up Maoism, A Global History by Julia Lovell. And hopefully this book is as good as Maoism is. So hopefully I will get to that pretty soon. Another recent acquisition and another book I really, really enjoyed. Dreams of Eldorado, A History of the American West by H.W. Brands. This is a really fascinating history of the American West that goes beyond the standard sort of narratives. Quite good. The Story of Egypt, The Civilization That Shaped the World by Joanne Fletcher. This was the final book for Nonfiction November this past year. Really, really love this book. This is a great history of ancient Egypt. and highly, highly recommended. Although maybe a little bit too stuck on the measurements of buildings. But anyway, this is another one I like. A History of South Africa by Frank Walsh. Read this a few years ago and quite liked it, and I've wanted it in my collection ever since. So picked it up more than a few months ago, I think. The Holy Roman Empire by Trevor Bryce. This is a relatively old book. Picked it up from the... No. I could have sworn I had picked this up from St. Edward's University. But no, this is a Waco McLennan County Library one. Anywho. So this book was, I think, at least 19... Let's see here. I want to say this book is about 100 years old. Well, more than 100 years old. But anyway, so it's a history of the Holy Roman Empire, which I do have a sweet tooth for. I definitely want to pick up Friedrich Heer's History of the Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire. Next is The Coming of the Third Reich by Richard J. Evans. Picked this up, obviously, with my last mail haul, or book haul, and look forward to getting to it. And also collecting the rest of the trilogy. And finally, another book I picked up in November, and a gorgeous, gorgeous cover. The Darkening Age, The Christian Destruction of the Classical World by Catherine Nixie. I mean, this book is, ooh, the cover is fantastic. So this is basically a history of the Christianization of the Roman Empire and the subsequent elimination of most of the, or a good chunk of the classical non-Christian patrimony, cultural patrimony, the sort of science and all of this stuff that had accumulated before Christianity became strong enough to basically purge everything else. But anywho, so that concludes the history section of my 2020 library tour. So for some final thoughts, I've been thinking about maybe moving the history shelves. So currently my history collection they're basically on two bookcases, one on top of the other, right here. And I've been thinking about reorganizing them and moving them over to this wall here that you can't see because obviously it's facing me and the camera's facing in the opposite direction. And that would give me an ability to either organize them by period or alphabetically by author. Because except for one shelf at the very end, the other one that my grandfather made, the middle shelves on both of them are rather small, so it's hard to fit like a hardback or a very tall trade paperback in them. So, but otherwise I would be able to get every size book on any shelf with no hassle. So that was one argument for moving them over here. But I've also been thinking that it kind of looks nicer over here. And also it can eventually move over into this bookcase here, which for the moment will probably be empty. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. I have about 2 weeks left before I decide. I want to get the next batch of the 2020 library tour done, which is the science fiction and fantasy books, which will take the next 2 weeks. and doing 2 videos for most of that. And then also the December book haul, so I can go ahead and put them in my personal library catalog, and then put them on the shelves and readjust the shelves at that point in time, because it just works better that way. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. And probably, if obviously this is completely different, I decided to switch them. But anyway, so I'm starting to ramble, and I want to get a tag done today, because I've been woefully missing out on some tags, and there have been some great Christmas themed tags making the rounds that I want to do before I get swamped into science fiction and fantasy. Anyway, even though I love science fiction and fantasy, it's my favorite genre, but I have a lot of books, and it's going to take quite a while to get through them. So anyway, so I'll see you in a few with a tag, and then later this afternoon with weekly reads. So until then, BookTape, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.